One question is about modernity, early modernity and social contract theories. This is going to be the midterm exam. The midterm exam, you got a grade from 18 to 30, and it's going to count for 40% for the final grade. If you don't want to study right now and you want to study all together, it's okay if you just come in June and do all the program. Doesn't make a difference. The thing is, I'm going to check if you studied or not, either now or if you know the things. I mean, if you'll be able to understand the basic concept either right now at the midterm or at the end. Those who made the presentation can obviously avoid to restudy the things on which they do presentation, and that's all. That's all. So internships. So for now we have 4 interns. I'm gonna see if I can find the new tasks for all the people who sent me their wonderful CVs and cover letters. You were all very well skilled, all the people who sent me application for internship, so I hope I can find new tasks, but for now I don't have it, unfortunately. So yeah. So what is the course of history of political thought about in this moment? In this moment, we are done with the Middle Ages. Long period of time, the Middle Ages, 1,000 years, from 400 after Christ to 1400 from after Christ. So 1,000 year, very long moment in the history of humanity, in the history of Western civilization, in the European history, let's say. When we say Middle Ages, it refers to European history. Because when Middle Ages ends, it's the moment in which Europe start to be less the center of the world. Because as we say, Middle Ages has a symbolic point of end in 1492, when it's the so-called discovery of America. From the European point of view, it's the discovery of something, of a new world that changes perspective and changes. If you look, as we will see in the last part of the course, if you look it from the other perspective, what we call modernity started with an act of colonization. It was not the discovery of a new world. It was that the Europeans colonized the Americas and killed all the people living there. So it was the moment of a genocide that Europeans did against the Native Americans. So we start to get out from this moment, and then we have humanism, Renaissance, we have the scientific revolution, the invention of the press, which also fostered the Reformation. Through these 4 main elements, we enter a new era of European civilization, in which all the things that were in the Middle Ages start to change, because the Middle Ages are not so important for the history of political thought, because the main political institution was the Roman Catholic Church, and the main principle is that we have to stick with the religious principles of the Bible, and that the political principles come from the religious principles, from the moral principle of Christianity, and from the idea that in this planet, in this earth, politics cannot be really achieved in its best form, because it's already achieved. It's achieved in the city of God, as St. Augustine told us. So, for history of political thought, to understand how we move from Middle Ages to modernity, we have considered one main thinkers, which brings us from Middle Ages to modernity, which is Niccolò Machiavelli, political thinker from Florence, who has been for a long time considered like evil, like the embodiment of evil, very, very bad guy. Why? Because he said politics is not about the good and the bad. Like it's moral. Moral is about the good and the bad. Religious principles have divided the world into good and into bad. But this is not the principle of politics. Politics is an autonomous domain with its specific laws. And these laws are not the laws that we see in morality. It's not about defining what is good and what is bad. It's defining how to increase the power of the state in order to increase the well-being of the populations living in the state. Like, for example, right now it's 1 week all the time talking about Trump and Vance bullying Volodymyr Zelensky, right? Or other people who said, yeah, but he went there and he was he was not showing his submission, his gratitude, and blah, 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 blah. So, one was bullying, the other was not respectful, and us was disrespectful. What Machiavelli would say about this? Yeah, you're talking about morality, but politics is not about this. It's not about, treating the other person in a moral way. It's about seeing if you are caring about the interest of your state. So this was Machiavelli would go on television and say, yeah, guys, okay, stop this moral debate about how Trump and Zelensky behave from this ethic point of view, and let's discuss if their behavior was in the interest of their states or was against the interest of their states. So this, shift the thing about saying, in this way, Trump is favoring the interest of Putin, or maybe Trump behaves this way because he wants to separate Russia from China, because his main problem is the power of China, and is that right now Russia and China are strongly allied, and they want to break this alliance, and so on. So this is the thing. This is the thing, So it's about the interest of the state. So sometimes, according to Machiavelli, you can behave brutally, but in a way that in politics is very good, because sometimes you have to act brutally, immorally, to preserve the interest of the state. So we study Machiavelli. Machiavelli is so important because he started to look at politics as a material thing, as an immanent thing, which is in this world and which has its own laws. And these laws doesn't come from studying theology, from studying metaphysics, or from studying ethics, but from studying history and how things are able to change in history, and the interest, and if you go in the interest of the state or not. But we do not consider yet Machiavelli modern, because he doesn't still have the idea of the state. He doesn't think yet in terms of state. He still thinks that's very important in terms of republic. So Machiavelli is considered very bad because he wrote The Prince and said the prince has to behave in this and this and this and this way. But when he writes his other book, The Discourses on Living, he says my favorite form of government is the republic. He wants to rebuild again constitution which is like the Roman Republic, So he's a Republican. So it's very important because it starts to, separate politics from all other things and start to say politics has its own laws. These laws are about power and are about the interest of the political community. So he says, the prince, all politicians have to act with virtue, but virtue is not a moral thing. Virtue means that you act in the interest of your community, of your political community, which sometimes implies to act bad. So virtue, different from virtue in ancient Greece, also sometimes implies acting in a bad way. Virtue and fortuna. and fortune. So he says to be a good prince, you need to have virtue, means that you need to act in a way that is in the public interest, but also it's about fortune. What is fortune? Fortune is that you have the lucky of being in the right moment at the right in the right place. Like again, Volodymyr Zelensky. He was a TV actor. He was just a TV actor, you know. By chance, he becomes the president of Ukraine, and right now is one of the most, discussed men in the world, and so it's fortune. You have to also be, history makes the difference. History makes the difference. And sometimes maybe you have the best ruler in the history of humanity, but it's in the wrong moment, in the wrong place, and it doesn't make any difference. So it's virtue and fortune. And from here, from Machiavelli, you start to say, okay, let's divide from politics from all other things. We enter early modernity. And in early modernity, what we want to understand is why we get to develop a political thought and a political doctrine who start to say we have to build a state. And the state is the result of a social contract between the population and the sovereign. This is contractarianism. This is how the political thought started to bring the process that has brought us to live under states, to be organized, to organize politics on a global level on states. Right now, if you look at almost all the space of this planet, I mean, the space which is Earth, which is Terra, not sea, not oceans, but the space in which you have land, is almost 100% divided into states. So states are the forms in which we nowadays live politically. This was not the case for 2,000 years in history, because as we saw, we lived under polis, under the cities. The cities in ancient Greece were the states, in ancient Greece were the cities, were an urban dimension. We lived under republics, we lived under empires, we had the feudal system. So, states is a modern thing. It's a modern thing. It started to grow up in the ideas in early modernity from 1500, and then it develops for 2 centuries, and then it becomes a strong institutional reality with the French Revolution, with the American Revolution, and still nowadays we live under states. Then we have, we have the processes of globalization driven by capitalism, where sometimes saying, okay, capitalism is supranational, state is national. So we have this movement of the global market who goes beyond the state, it becomes international. So you have globalization, you have international entities who becomes more important, like the United Nations, like the WTO, like the OECD. So you have international organization who becomes more important in some moments when you have globalization, but right now we see that states are still getting more and more important, and you have the reaction of nationalist parties, of sovereignist parties who say no, we still have to live under nation states. And so we have a very strong nationalists right now who say no, we want the sovereignty of the state. Stop with this globalization bullshit, we want to get back to the nation state. So states, we what are we doing right now is trying to understand how we came to these strange ideas of the state. And to understand this point, we study a political doctrine which is called contractarianism. Contractarianism is very new because whilst in the Middle Ages you think that power of the sovereign comes from God, from God's will, contractarianism starts to say no. Is a contract between the population and the sovereign. The power of the sovereign comes from the people, from the population who decides to give you power. This is contractarianism. So we observe three contractarianist thinkers who are Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We choose these three because each one of these three gave a major contribution to the development of the ideas that we still have right now. Thomas Hobbes, the sovereignty. So we look at Thomas Hobbes as the first to really conceptualize the idea of the sovereign power, of the state as a sovereign power. And we look at Thomas Hobbes as this foundation of sovereignty. So we look at his book, The Leviathan. The Leviathan who says, we make a pact all together, we make a covenant to give all our powers, all our rights to the state. Otherwise, is chaos, is state of nature, is the war of all against all. So he thinks the point is self-preservation. He lives in a time in which you have religious war all over Europe. You have people killing each other. You have a situation in which if you travel in Europe, you get robbed, you get killed, you get stabbed. So he says, the most important thing is self-preservation, is the violence, social violence is the main problem. So we have to build a Leviathan who have a sword in his hand and can, and can kill everybody, break the law, and can punish everybody who breaks the laws. So Thomas Hobbes thinks of the state, of the sovereign power as, this construction of this mortal god that is the state, who is able to remove violence from society by taking himself all the violence, the monopoly of violence, through the police, through the judiciary system, through the army, in a way that violence is not anymore allowed in society. Only the state can exercise violence, has this power, and this power, which is above any other powers, is called sovereignty. And still nowadays, if you look at the constitutions of every country in the world, you still have the word sovereignty or sovereign somewhere. Most constitutions of the states that nowadays exist start to say this country is a sovereign country. Means it's not anymore under the control of other country. There is no other powers above this power. Sovereignty. Then we have gone to John Locke. John Locke is important because he's the founding father of liberalism. We have to understand that Western societies still believe that the liberal principles are the most important liberal principles. So he's a contractarianist like Thomas Hobbes, but it says, okay, if you live in the state of nature, is not the state of war of all against all, as you think, Thomas Hobbes, because you think that all men are bad, all men are cruel, all men are self-interested and only act in their own way. Because human beings, they're also smart people and they understand that they have natural rights that they don't want to break. So these natural rights, for example, for Locke, life, freedom, and property. So if we live in a state of nature without police, without government, without courts, we tend to respect these things. But we don't have a sovereign power who can decide when we have a conflict over someone. So if myself I argue with Abnana, who's gonna say if Abnana is right or wrong? If I say, okay, Abnana did hurt my children, I wanna kill her because it's right. You don't hurt children in society. So I wanna kill her. Who decides if it's right to kill her or not? So it's the state of nature, according to Locke, is not that bad because we respect natural rights, but but we don't have a power to decide in case of controversy. So we enter the social contract. But how is the social contract for John Locke? What is a right social contract according to liberalism, according to liberal theory? Is a social contract in which government is limited. There is a limitation for government, and this limitation is called rights. Individual rights. Individual rights are the limitations that the government cannot surpass, cannot break. Individual rights. So here, when we say individual rights, we have to understand that also a difference. Like in antiquity, in the Middle Ages, community was the most important thing. If we think, of the ancient ideas of the Republic, you have to be ready to die for your country. Community is most important. Modernity in Western society is, the emergence of the individual level, of the individual, of the person as the crucial point that must be respected. So, and we see that this was, also fostered by the rise of Protestantism, because Protestantism says you can talk straight away, you can have your individual relationship to God. You don't need anymore the community of the, of the church, for example, the Catholic Church, to establish and to talk to God. So we have this rise of individualism, and liberalism is about individual rights. Individual rights are the limit beyond which the government cannot go. So John Locke says, okay, Thomas Hobbes, you're right, we need a social contract, but in this social contract you made the sovereign power too much powerful. Because you say one moment that we sign this covenant among us and give all our rights and liberty to the sovereign, to the Leviathan, we cannot say anything anymore. John Locke says no, we have to put some limitations. Liberalism is about putting limitations to the government. And these limitations are the individual rights. So, Locke says, yeah, when you sign a contract, it's binding for you, the people, but it's also binding for the government. So, if the government goes beyond its own prerogatives and act against your rights, against the rights that are recognized to you, against your natural rights, against your legal rights, you have a right which is called the right to resist. The right to resist means that you have the right to overthrow this government because you broke the contract. Okay? You can still find the right to resist in the American Constitution. It's an article of the American Constitution, and is one of the reasons why in the United States of America is a constitutional right to bear arms, because maybe one day they can be useful, to exercise this right to resist. Liberalism. Liberalism is a political doctrine that says power must be limited. Power must be limited. This is why, the point is that at the United Nations, you say, yeah, every state can be here, can be sit here, but we have a distinction between the states who respect human rights and the states who do not respect human rights. The states who do not respect human rights are, despotism, autocracies. So they're not entirely legitimate according to the paradigms, the values of Western societies, because they don't put this limitation. Why liberalism is so obsessed about limiting government? Because liberalism is based on negative freedom. Negative freedom. So, today with Jean-Jacques Rousseau we will consider positive freedom. But let's keep again negative freedom. Hobbes, Locke, they think of freedom, of liberty. They have an idea of liberty which is negative liberty. Negative freedom. What is negative freedom? Negative freedom means that freedom, liberty, is the absence of rule. So when there is not a law that say you cannot do that, when there is no regulation, a limitation, and blah, 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 you can do whatever you want. And this is freedom, this is liberty. This is why they want to reduce government, the legislation, in order to give you more liberty that you want. Liberalism is about giving liberty. And in order to give liberty as negative freedom, you have to limit the government. So you expand rights, you make more rights in order to make more limitation to the action of government. This is, how it was born. Obviously, it's much more complex. It's much more complex right now, but we will see at the end of the course. So, Abnana, come here. So, Abnana wanted to make a presentation on John Locke, and she's gonna tell us something more about John Locke, and then we're gonna skip to Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Something more, I think just like
a recap of what I just said. Okay, Abnana, so you have this cable.